I stood frozen in the ballroom while my husband turned a wedding toast into a public execution of my character. He raised his glass and called me a burden in front of everyone I loved. I did not cry. Instead, I leaned in close and whispered the secret that would end him. I told him I knew about the pregnancy and exactly which company credit card he had used to pay for it. Then every phone in the room began to buzz. My name is Harper Cole, and I was standing in the banquet hall of the Riverside Hotel in Ridgeport, Massachusetts, waiting for the bullet. The air in the room was thick with the smell of roasted lamb, expensive Chardonnay, and the cloying scent of 50 different floral perfumes. A string quartet played something soft and generic in the corner, but to my ears, it sounded like a funeral dirge. I stood near the edge of the dance floor and gripped my clutch so hard my knuckles turned white. I was not the bride. I was not the center of attention. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that I was the target. My husband, Derek Whitmore, stepped up to the microphone. He looked impeccable in his custom navy suit, the one I had picked out for him 2 months ago. He tapped the microphone twice, commanding the room with that easy, predatory charm that had fooled investors for 5 years, and me for 7. To the happy couple, Derek announced, his voice booming and rich. He raised his champagne flute high. To Lena and Evan, may your love be wilder than my wife's sense of humor. A ripple of laughter went through the groom's side of the room. I did not smile. I watched him pivot, turning his back slightly to the bride and groom so he could address the room at large. He was not here to toast my sister. He was here to burn me down. You know, Derek continued, swirling his wine. People always tell me how lucky I am. They say Harper is the brains, Harper is the stability. And it is true. My wife is very good at existing. She supports me, like a crutch you use when you have a broken leg. He paused for effect, waiting for the chuckles to die down. But eventually, the leg heals. And you realize the crutch is just heavy. She fits in the background, and as of today, the background does not need her anymore. The silence that followed was not the respectful kind. It was the jagged, uncomfortable silence of 100 people witnessing a public cruelty. The table where Derek's college friends sat erupted in drunken laughter, but my family sat frozen. I looked at the head table. Evan, the groom, looked confused, his smile faltering. But my eyes locked on my sister. Lena. She sat stiff in her white lace gown. Her face had drained of all color. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, shielding it. It was a reflex, a protective instinct. That was the confirmation I needed. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink. I simply started walking. My heels clicked rhythmically against the parquet floor, the only sound in the sudden quiet. I walked straight up to Derek. He grinned at me, expecting a fight, expecting me to make a scene that he could use later to prove I was unstable. I stopped 6 inches from him. I did not reach for the microphone. I leaned in, invading his personal space, and put my lips right next to his ear. I know about Lena's pregnancy, I whispered, my voice steady and cold. And I know you paid for it with the company card? Derek flinched. His grin died instantly. He pulled back, his eyes darting frantically to Lena, looking at her like she was a vault that had just been cracked open. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Then, the sound began. It started at the VIP table. Buzzed. Buzzed. Then it jumped to the table behind them. Buzzed. 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 Within 10 seconds, the room was filled with the low, insect-like humming of vibration. It rippled through the hall like a wave. Every smartphone in the room lit up simultaneously. The guests reached into their pockets and purses, confusion washing over their faces. I watched Derek look down at his own phone, which was sitting on the tablecloth next to the wedding cake. The screen was bright, displaying the notification that had just been delivered to every contact in our shared network, every investor, and every family member present. Subject evidence, fake charity and pre-wedding transfer accounts. Derek looked up at me, and for the first time in our marriage, the mask was gone. His hand trembled so violently that champagne sloshed over the rim of his glass and stained his cuff. He looked at Evan, who was staring at his phone with a furrowed brow. He looked at Lena, who was staring at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Finally, he looked at my mother. She was sitting at the front table, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She looked at me, and her eyes were hard and clear. She had known something was wrong for weeks. She was just waiting for me to pull the trigger. "Harper," Derek stammered, his voice cracking without the microphone to amplify it. "Harper." "Wait. I am done waiting," I said, loud enough for the first row to hear. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him standing in the spotlight he had demanded, drowning in the truth I had finally served. The night was no longer a celebration. It was an autopsy. I am 36 years old, and I was raised in a small town in Ohio where the highest virtue a woman could possess was the ability to keep the peace. We were taught to swallow our words like bitter medicine, to smooth over rough edges, and to never, ever let the neighbors hear a raised voice. I carried that habit into adulthood like a genetic defect. It was a survival mechanism that Derek spotted the moment we met. He found me when I was working as a senior risk analyst for a mid-sized firm in Chicago. I was the person who found the cracks in the dam before the water broke through. Derek was in sales, flashy and loud, the kind of man who could sell ice to a polar bear but could not balance a checkbook. He courted me with a proposition, not a romance. "You are the brain, Harper," he had told me over dinner on our third date, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "I am the voice. Imagine what we could do if we put those two things together. We would be unstoppable." It sounded like a perfect partnership. It felt like a marriage of equals. So I married him, and I poured my life savings and my sanity into building the Whitmore Sable Group. The name sounded established. Old money, and reliable. That was my idea. The sleek downtown office with the glass walls and the mid-century modern furniture. My design. The business cards that felt like heavy silk in your hand. My choice. But slowly, over 5 years, I became the ghost in the machine I had built. It happened in increments so small I barely noticed them until the pattern was set. I would stay up until 3 in the morning perfecting a pitch deck, agonizing over every data point and projection. The next morning, Derek would stand in front of the client, button his jacket, and present my slides as if the ideas had sprung fully formed from his own forehead. "My vision for this quarter is aggressive growth," he would say, pointing to a chart I had built pixel by pixel. He never said our vision. He never said Harper's analysis. When I confronted him in the safety of our kitchen, he would laugh it off, pouring me a glass of wine with a patronizing smile. "Babe, you know how it works," he would say, kissing my forehead. "I am the face. You are the foundation. You cannot see the foundation, but the house falls down without it. You are the most important part." I told myself he was right. I told myself I was being petty. I was the foundation. But I eventually realized that a foundation is just something people walk all over. The disrespect moved from private omission to public dismissal. We would be at dinner parties with potential investors, and if I tried to add a nuance to a story or correct a factual error, Derek would cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Harper just handles the logistics," he would say to the table, chuckling. "She worries about the paperwork so I can worry about the big picture." Right. Honey Harper just handles the logistics. It was a sentence light as a feather, but it sliced like a razor. It reduced my master's degree, my 80-hour work weeks, and my intellectual property to the level of ordering lunch and filing receipts. I stayed silent because I did not want to be the shrew. I stayed silent because I did not want to embarrass him. But mostly, I stayed silent for Lena. My younger sister was the bright, shining light of our family. She looked at marriage as a fairy tale, and she looked at Derek and me as the blueprint. She was so happy during her engagement to Evan, buzzing with the nervous energy of a bride who believes everything is going to be perfect. Derek knew that. He weaponized my love for my sister against me. He knew I would never cause a scene that might shadow her joy. He banked on my Ohio upbringing, on my history of swallowing my pride to keep the peace. He thought the wedding was the safest place in the world to discard me because he believed the audience of my family would force me into submission. He chose the wedding toast to humiliate me because he was certain I would just sit there, bite my lip, and take it. He thought I was trapped by the occasion, but he forgot one thing about risk analysts. We do not just calculate the probability of success. We also calculate the blast radius of total failure. And I had decided that if he wanted to burn down my house, I was going to make sure he was locked inside when the roof collapsed. Lena had gotten engaged to Evan Brooks 6 months ago, and honestly, he was the kind of man most fathers prayed their daughters would find. He was a civil engineer who spent his days calculating load-bearing capacities for highway bridges, a man of quiet strength and absolute precision. When he looked at my sister, he did not look at her like she was a prize or an accessory. He looked at her like she was the only home he had ever known. It made the impending disaster feel that much heavier. The trouble began with what everyone kept calling pre-wedding jitters. Lena has always been anxious, but this was different. About 8 weeks before the big day, I went over to her apartment to help address invitations. I found her sitting on the kitchen floor, nibbling on the edge of a dry saltine cracker. The smell of fresh coffee, which usually fueled our mornings, was absent. When I offered to brew a pot, she turned a shade of green that matched the stems of the flowers in the vase on the counter. "No," she said, too sharply. Then she softened, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I mean, please do not. The smell just... It turns my stomach lately." I sat down next to her. "Lena, are you okay? You look exhausted." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It is just stress." "Harper, you know how it is. The seating charts, the caterer. It is a lot." But as she said it, her hand drifted down from her forehead and rested protectively over her lower abdomen. It stayed there for a second too long before she seemed to realize what she was doing and snatched it away. I filed that image away in the back of my mind, not wanting to jump to conclusions. Then there was Derek. My husband, who usually could not be bothered to remember his own mother's birthday, suddenly became the unofficial wedding planner. He was obsessed with the logistics of Lena's day. He insisted on reviewing the seating arrangements, moving relatives around like chess pieces. He showed up at the florist when Lena was choosing centerpieces, claiming he happened to be in the neighborhood. "I just want to help," Derek told me when I questioned him one evening. "Lena is overwhelmed. I am just stepping up. That is what family does." It sounded noble, but it felt invasive. The cracks in his performance started to show at the final dress fitting. Derek had insisted on driving Lena and me to the boutique because it was snowing. He waited in the lobby while Lena stood on the pedestal, the seamstress pinning the hem of her gown. I was standing behind her, adjusting her veil, when I saw it. The door to the fitting room was slightly ajar, and Derek was visible in the reflection of the tri-fold mirror. He was looking at her. It was not the look of a brother-in-law admiring a beautiful bride. It was a look of possession, intense, heavy, and warning. Lena caught his gaze in the glass. She did not smile. She did not wave. She froze. Her shoulders hiked up toward her ears, and the look in her eyes was sheer, unadulterated fear. "Lena," I whispered. She blinked, breaking the trance. "I am fine," she breathed out, her voice trembling. "Just cold." My mother noticed it too, in her own way. A few days later, while we were packing favors. Mom leaned over to me. "Harper, have you noticed your sister? She looks drawn, pale, like all the blood has been drained out of her." I nodded, pretending to focus on the sugared almonds I was bagging. Wedding diet. Maybe. But the pieces finally clicked together on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before the rehearsal dinner. I had taken Derek's car to get it washed because he claimed he was too busy with meetings. As I was vacuuming the interior, the nozzle bumped against something hard under the passenger seat. I reached underneath and pulled out a small, white plastic bag from a pharmacy. Inside was a bottle of high-grade prenatal vitamins, the expensive kind. The kind you do not buy unless you are absolutely sure. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, staring at the bottle. When I got home, I walked into the study where Derek was working and placed the bottle on his desk. "Why were these under your passenger seat?" I asked. Derek did not even look up from his laptop for a solid 3 seconds. When he did, his face was a mask of calm. "Oh, those," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "They are for Sarah in accounting. She is pregnant and embarrassed to tell her husband yet because they are having money trouble. She asked me to pick them up so no one would see her buying them. I forgot to give them to her. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because it was too detailed, too quick, and too altruistic for a man who famously fired his assistant for crying at her desk." "Right," I said, picking the bottle back up. "That was nice of you. I try," he said, finally meeting my eyes with a challenge in his gaze. "Now, if you do not mind, I have work." I walked out of the room, my blood running cold, the nausea, the fear in the mirror, the vitamins, Derek's sudden obsession with the wedding. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a crime scene that had been dressed up in white lace and peonies, and my husband was the one holding the shovel. I discovered that Derek had quietly changed our legal representation. For years, we had used a family friend for our estate planning, a gentleman who sent Christmas cards. But when I looked at the billing code on the new retainer agreement sitting on the corner of the desk, the firm name was Vanguard and Stone. I looked them up immediately. They did not specialize in family mediation. They specialized in high asset protection, irrevocable trusts, and aggressive litigation. You do not hire Vanguard and Stone to fix a marriage. You hire them to lock the doors and burn the building down with the other person inside. That was the first tremor. The earthquake came when I went to the home office printer. It had jammed, as it often did, and Derek had simply walked away from it. I pulled the paper tray out and carefully extracted the crumpled document that had caused the blockage. It was a draft titled Restructuring Agreement of Whitmore Sable Group. I smoothed the paper out on the desk. My eyes scanned the clauses with the speed of a forensic accountant. Clause 4A, revocation of silent partner equity. My name was gone. It had been systematically scrubbed from the founding documents as if I had never spent 5 years building the infrastructure of the firm. According to this paper, I was not a co-founder. I was a past tense liability. I sat down at my computer and pulled up the banking logs. I needed to follow the money. I cross-referenced the account numbers listed in the draft against our recent outflows. It was a sloppy mistake on his part, leaving the routing numbers visible on a draft. But arrogance often makes people careless. I found a sequence of 3 transfers that matched the timeline perfectly. First, a transfer of $10,000 to Ridgeport Event Hall, dated 3 months ago. That was the wedding venue deposit. Second, a transfer of $50,000 to something called the Chrysalis Initiative, labeled as a charitable donation for tax purposes. Third, and most damning, a recurring payment of $3,500 to Bayside Private Obstetrics. I clicked on the transaction details for the obstetrics payment. It was not billed to Lena. It was not billed to Evan. It was billed to WSG Holdings LLC, a shell company I did not know existed, and it was paid for with the primary corporate American Express card, the same card that was currently sitting in Derek's wallet. The picture came into sharp, terrifying focus. Derek was not just having an affair or manipulating a wedding. He was orchestrating a corporate coup. His plan was elegant in its cruelty. He intended to use the wedding toast to paint me as unstable, jealous, and perhaps even mentally unwell. If he could announce our separation publicly due to my behavior, he could trigger the morality clause in our original partnership agreement. It was a clause he had insisted on adding years ago, claiming it was standard practice. He was going to gaslight me into a public breakdown and then use that breakdown to steal my shares. I felt a vibration in my chest, but it was not fear. It was the hum of a server coming online. I needed one last piece of confirmation. I hacked into his cloud calendar, bypassing the password he had changed last week by answering the security questions he had forgotten he set up. There it was, sitting innocently on Saturday's date. 7:30 in the evening toast. 8 o'clock in the evening emergency board call. He had scheduled the board meeting for exactly 30 minutes after he planned to destroy me. He intended to walk off that stage, accept the sympathy of the crowd for dealing with a crazy wife, and then step into a quiet room to finalize the theft while I was busy crying in the bathroom. He did not just want to hurt me. He wanted to silence me so completely that by the time I found my voice, the ink would already be dry. I did not cry. Tears are for people who have run out of options. I opened a new folder on my encrypted drive. I typed a single word for the file name receipts. I dragged the PDF of the restructuring draft into the folder. I added the screenshots of the bank transfers. I added the photo of the prenatal vitamins I had taken in the car. If you want to use my sister's wedding as a smokescreen, I whispered to the empty room, my voice low and steady. Then I will turn it into a projector. The first call I made was to Maya Keene. We had survived graduate school together, but while I went into risk analysis, Maya went into forensic accounting. She was the kind of person who could look at a spreadsheet and see a crime scene. I met her at a diner 3 towns over, sliding a flash drive across the table between the salt shaker and the ketchup bottle. She listened to my summary without blinking, her coffee cooling untouched. "Do you want me to dig until I hit bone?" Maya asked, tapping her fingernail against the table, "or just enough to make the structure collapse bone?" I said, "I want to see the marrow." Next, I hired Rosa Medina. She was not a family lawyer. She was a corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers and executive disputes. I sat in her glass-walled office and laid out the restructuring draft I had found. Rosa read it, her face impassive, before she looked up over her glasses. "Do not just break things." "Harper," Rosa advised, her voice sharp and precise. "If you break them out of anger, he sues you for damages. You need to lock them down with the law. Make it so he cannot move without cutting himself." I spent the next 48 hours compiling a digital fortress. I gathered everything legally accessible to me as a current officer of the company. I pulled emails, credit card statements, meeting logs, and the metadata from the restructuring draft. I found a voice memo on Derek's synchronized iPad, recorded while he was driving. In it, he was dictating notes to himself about the upcoming fiscal year. "We need to cut the dead weight by Q3, his voice said through the speaker, casual and cruel. "Once the merger is clear, she is out. The optics will settle. Dead weight." That was me. I moved fast. I filed emergency paperwork to activate a dormant LLC I had established years ago, transferring the intellectual property rights of the predictive algorithms which I had written 2 years before our marriage into it. I had the timestamps to prove ownership. He could steal the company name, but without my code, the Whitmore Sable Group was just a shiny car with no engine. Maya called me on Thursday night. Her voice was buzzing with the adrenaline of the hunt. "Harper, this charity," she said. "The Chrysalis Initiative. It is a ghost. Money goes in from the corporate account, supposedly for community outreach. It sits there for 3 days. Then it gets paid out to a media consultant in the Cayman Islands. Guess whose personal bank account receives a wire transfer from that same consultant exactly 24 hours later? Derek." I whispered. "It is a laundry cycle," Maya confirmed. "He is siphoning company funds to pay for his life, and he is using the wedding expenses to hide the spikes in volume. Rosa took that information and drafted a formal notice to the board of directors. It was a packet of 50 pages, outlining embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. We did not send it yet. We set it on a timer. But I still needed to face the emotional core of this nightmare. I needed to look my sister in the eye. I texted Lena and asked her to meet me for tea at a small cafe near the bridal shop. She arrived looking like a ghost, her skin translucent and her eyes rimmed with red. She ordered an herbal tea and stared into the cup as if looking for a way out. I did not scream. I did not accuse. I simply stated the fact that was sitting between us like a loaded gun. "You are pregnant," I said. Lena flinched so hard she nearly knocked over her cup. She looked up at me, her mouth opening to form a lie, but the lie died in her throat. Her face went from pale to gray. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling in her lap. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. That silence was the only confession I needed. "Harper," she choked out, tears spilling over her lashes. "Please, do not ask me anymore. I cannot talk about it." "You have the right to remain silent, Lena," I said, my voice steady despite the cracking of my own heart. "But I do not have the obligation to stay blind." I stood up, leaving my tea untouched. I looked down at my little sister, the girl I had protected from bullies on the playground, the girl I had tutored in math, the girl who was now carrying a secret that was going to detonate my life. "I will not ruin your wedding," I told her. "I will not make a scene for the sake of making a scene. But know this when the roof comes down on Saturday night. I am not saving anyone but myself." The day before the wedding, Derek performed the role of the perfect husband with terrifying precision. He arrived at the rehearsal dinner with a bottle of 30-year-old scotch for my father and a silk scarf from Paris for my mother. He laughed at my uncle's bad jokes and charmed the wedding planner until she was practically eating out of his hand. My family looked at him with adoration. And then they looked at me with that specific kind of pity reserved for women they think have lucked out beyond their station. "You held on to a good one, Harper," my Aunt Linda whispered to me over the buffet, unaware that the man she was praising was currently liquidating my assets. But the mask slipped the moment we stepped into the shadow of the hallway outside the banquet room. Derek grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, pressing the bones together just enough to send a warning shot up my arm. He pulled me close, his cologne overwhelming my senses. "Tomorrow night. You just smile," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Make it a pretty smile. Do not ruin this for Lena. If you make a scene, if you make her cry on her big day, you will never be forgiven by anyone in this zip code." I looked at him and saw the strategy clearly. He was not just threatening me. He was using my sister as a human shield. He knew I would burn myself alive before I let a spark touch Lena's happiness. He was banking on my morality to protect his immorality. By the time we arrived at the venue the next afternoon, the battlefield had been rearranged. I walked past the easel holding the seating chart and stopped cold. It had been changed for the third time. Derek was now seated at the VIP table right next to the bride and groom, in the seat of honor usually reserved for the father of the bride. And I had been moved to table 19, tucked away in the back corner near the kitchen doors, seated with the extended cousins who I had not seen in a decade. He had physically removed me from the narrative. I was too far away for the photographer's lens, too far away to reach a microphone, and too far away to stop him. I went to the bridal suite to check on Lena. The sound hit me before I opened the door. It was the wet, jagged sound of retching coming from the private bathroom. I pushed inside to find Lena hunched over the toilet, still in her silk robe, clutching her stomach. Two bridesmaids were hovering nervously, holding wet towels. "It is just nerves," one of them chirped, her voice pitched too high. "Just pre-wedding jitters." I looked up and saw Derek standing in the doorway of the suite. He was not looking at Lena with concern. He was checking his watch, His face was cold, calculating the timeline, annoyed that her morning sickness might delay the schedule. He met my eyes and did not even blink. He looked like a handler waiting for a racehorse to stop twitching so he could get it to the gate. I walked out into the corridor and nearly ran into Evan. The groom looked rattled. He was adjusting his tie, but his hands were shaking. "Harper," he said, stopping me. Is everything okay? Derek is changing the music cues. He is moving the speeches around. Is he pushing too hard?" I looked at Evan. He was a good man. He loved my sister. And in a few hours, his heart was going to be broken. "Evan," I said softly, placing a hand on his arm. You remember to look at Lena tonight. When everyone is looking at the microphone, you look at your wife." He frowned, confused, but before he could ask more, my mother appeared. She did not look at Evan. She walked straight to me. Her eyes were sharp, scanning my face, reading the tension in my jaw. She reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy silver hair clip, an heirloom she had worn at her own wedding. "Here," she said, shoving it into my hand, "pin your hair back. If you are going to stand in the back, you stand up straight. Do not let them see you slump." It sounded like a tactical command. I nodded and pinned the silver clip into place. It felt like putting on a helmet. Just as the reception doors opened, my phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Derek. "After the toast, we end this civilized, do not make it hard." He thought he had won. He thought I was cowed by the seating chart and the threat of ruining the family reputation. I typed back a single word. "Okay." I slipped the phone back into my bag. It was done. The file named Receipts was uploaded to the cloud server. The email blast was scheduled for exactly 8 o'clock. Rosa and Maya were on standby, watching the digital feed like snipers. I took a deep breath of the cold air conditioning and walked into the ballroom. I was ready to play my part in his tragedy. The ceremony was perfect. The sunset over the river was painted in hues of violet and gold. The vows were tearful and poetic, and the flower girl did not drop a single petal out of place. It was a masterpiece of orchestration. That perfection made what was about to happen feel less like a disruption and more like a desecration. As the dinner service began and the champagne was poured, Derek tapped a spoon against his glass. He asked the DJ for the microphone, claiming he wanted to offer a moment of family reflection before the dancing started. The room warmed to him immediately. He looked handsome, successful, and loving. "To Lena," Derek started, his voice thick with performative emotion. "You look breathtaking tonight. You remind us all that love is the only thing that matters." He raised his glass to her. Lena smiled, but it was a crooked, broken thing. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Beside her, Evan did not smile. He was watching Derek with a tight jaw, the look of a man who senses a predator near his nest but cannot quite see it yet. Then, Derek pivoted. He turned his body physically away from the head table and looked toward the back of the room, scanning the crowd until he found me at table 19. And of course, to my wife. "Harper," he said, his tone shifting into that mock playful register bullies use to hide knives. "You know, everyone says Harper is the serious one. She is the one who checks the receipts while the rest of us are busy living life. She loves control. God, does she love control? It is a heavy burden, living with someone who is good with numbers, but perhaps not so good with people." A few guests chuckled nervously. The air in the room grew thin. Derek was not stopping. "Harper always likes to say she is the foundation of our success," Derek continued, his eyes locking onto mine with cold malice. "But the thing about foundations is, they get old. They crack. And sometimes the foundation just needs to be replaced." He held his glass up, staring me down. It was a public discard. He was ending our marriage and my career in front of 200 witnesses, daring me to react. Lena let out a small, choked sound. Evan turned to look at Derek, his expression shifting from confusion to pure, unadulterated anger. He looked like he was about to stand up and shove Derek off the riser, but I moved first. I did not run. I did not storm the stage. I stood up and smoothed the silk of my dress. I walked toward the head table. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic click of my heels on the hardwood floor. I did not reach for the microphone. I did not try to take the spotlight. I simply stepped up onto the riser and stood directly next to him. I moved into his personal space, close enough to smell the scotch on his breath, close enough that the microphone would pick up the intimacy, but not the words, if I kept them low. I leaned up and whispered, "I know how many weeks along Lena is. I know which clinic you went to, and I know who you paid to keep quiet." Derek froze. His smile did not fade, it simply shattered. His eyes went wide, the pupils dilating in sheer panic. He stumbled back a half step, his hand hitting the microphone stand with a dull thud. He stammered, the microphone catching his sudden breathlessness. What? And then the sound began. It started as a low hum. Bzzzt. Then another. Bzzzt. Then a dozen. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. It was the sound of 200 phones receiving a priority email notification simultaneously. The vibration traveled through the wooden tables, creating a dull roar that drowned out the soft jazz playing in the background. Guests reached into pockets and purses. I saw the light of screens illuminating faces. Evan pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. I watched the color drain from his face as he read the subject line. He looked up, not at Derek, but at the attached PDF. Lena stared at her phone lying on the table. She read the notification, then she looked up at me. For months, she had looked at me with fear, afraid I would judge her, afraid I would destroy her. But in that moment, as the room filled with the digital echo of the truth, her eyes changed. She realized I had not walked up there to ruin her wedding. I had walked up there to kill the monster that was haunting it. Derek looked at the sea of glowing screens, then back at me. His hand was shaking so hard, the wine in his glass was creating a miniature storm. "Harper," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "What? What did you do?" I did not answer him. I just stepped back and let the silence scream for me. The email that had just landed in 200 inboxes was not just a spreadsheet. It was a timeline. It laid out the financial anatomy of a betrayal. The attachment showed exactly how Derek had used the bogus charity as a pipeline to siphon corporate funds, and then used the chaotic expenses of the wedding to legitimize the cash flow. Every time a vendor was paid for flowers or catering, a matching amount was transferred silently into his private offshore account. He had turned my sister's marriage into a money laundering operation. The silence in the room broke when Arthur Henderson, the lead investor of our firm, stood up at the VIP table. His face was purple with rage. He held his phone up like a weapon. "Derek," Arthur boomed, his voice shaking the crystal glasses on the table. "This report says the quarterly financials were adjusted manually. By you. Is this why you fired the external auditor last month before Derek could answer?" A murmur rippled through the room. People were checking their banking apps. The email had included a list of compromised accounts associated with the firm's investment pool. "My account is flagged," someone shouted from the back. "Why is my account flagged for suspicious activity?" Derek looked around wildly, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is a mistake. It is a glitch. Harper is... She is hacking the system. Do not listen to her." But the digital assault was not over. Maya sent the second file. My phone buzzed again, along with everyone else's. This one was a single image, a receipt from the clinic. But it was not just for prenatal care. It was for a paternity verification test. The date on the receipt matched the exact dates Derek had told me he was in Chicago for a tech conference. At the head table, The dam finally broke. Lena turned to Evan, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She grabbed his hand, but he pulled it away as if her skin burned him. "Evan, please." Lena sobbed, her voice carrying over the stunned crowd. I did not know how to tell you. I was so drunk that night at the cabin. Derek said he would take me home safely. I woke up and he was there. I was so scared. Evan, I did not know if it was real or if I made it up. The room gasped. It was not just an affair. It was predation. Derek had preyed on my sister when she was vulnerable, and then he had used the resulting pregnancy to trap her in a web of silence. Evan Brooks looked at Derek. The look on his face was not rage. It was absolute, hollow devastation. He did not flip the table. He did not throw a punch. He slowly reached for his left hand. He slid the gold wedding band off his finger. He placed it gently into Lena's trembling palm. "I need the truth," Evan said, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise like a razor. "I need the truth before I need an apology, and I cannot stay here while I wait for it." Derek saw his control evaporating. He lunged toward the edge of the riser, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is insane," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Harper is jealous. She has always been jealous of Lena. She is off her meds. She planned this to ruin the wedding because she cannot stand to see her sister happy. It is not a plan, Derek," I said calmly from the floor. "It is a legal filing." I pointed to the screens. The documents were not just screenshots. They were formal affidavits sent directly from the offices of Medina and Associates, digitally signed and time-stamped. They were admissible in court, and everyone in the room knew it. 2 of Derek's groomsmen, loyal college buddies who looked like they wanted to fight someone, started to move toward me. They looked angry, fueled by confusion and alcohol, but before they could take 2 steps, my mother moved. She had been the quiet peacekeeper for 30 years, the woman who smoothed over every rough edge. But now, she stepped directly in front of me. She stood 5 feet tall in her mother-of-the-bride dress, but she looked like a giant. "Do not touch her," my mother said. Her voice was low, lethal, and brooked no argument. "Do not anyone dare touch my daughter." The groomsmen stopped in their tracks. The room seemed to shrink away from the stage. Lena sat alone at the head table, clutching her stomach, shivering violently. She finally realized the truth. She was not a partner in a secret. She was a tool. Derek had used her body to secure his legacy and used her wedding to hide his theft. I looked at Derek one last time. He was standing alone under the bright lights of the stage he had demanded. He looked at the investors calling their lawyers, at Evan walking toward the exit, and at his wife looking at him with revulsion. He was no longer the director of the play. He was just a man who had forgotten that when you burn a bridge, you have to make sure you are not still standing on it. Within 20 minutes, the chaos of the ballroom had been contained within the 4 beige walls of the hotel's small conference room. It was a makeshift boardroom for a makeshift execution. 3 of the firm's largest investors, including Arthur Henderson, had practically dragged Derek off the stage and into this room. They were not looking at him like a CEO anymore. They were looking at him like a liability that needed to be cut loose before the infection spread. My phone buzzed. It was Rosa. "They want to negotiate," Rosa said, her voice crisp in my ear. "And Harper. They are scared more than they are angry. Go inside. Finish it." I pushed open the double doors. The air inside was stale, smelling of old coffee and fresh panic. Derek was sitting at the head of the oval table, his tie loosened, his face a mask of sweaty desperation. When I walked in, the room shifted. For 5 years, I had walked into rooms like this carrying coffee or notepads, invisible. Tonight, I walked in as the person holding the keys to the exit. Derek did not wait for me to sit. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished wood table toward me. "Sign it," Derek snapped, though his voice lacked its usual baritone command. "It is a separation agreement. Full spousal support, you keep the house, and we issue a joint statement blaming stress. Sign it, Harper. And this circus stops." I picked up the document. I did not read the numbers. I looked at the bottom of the last page. "This is dated 18 months ago," I said, tossing the paper back at him. "You forged the date to predate the launch of the predictive model. If I sign this, I am admitting I had no rights to the company's growth for the last 2 years. You are not trying to stop the chaos, Derek. You are trying to retroactively rob me." Before Derek could spin another lie, the door opened again. It was Evan. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He did not look at Derek. He walked straight to me and held out his phone. "Read it," Evan said, his voice hollow. It was a screenshot of a text message from Lena, sent to Evan 3 weeks ago. "I am scared of Derek. He looks at me like I owe him something." I told Harper, but she did not believe me. She thinks I am just stressed. The words hit me harder than any insult Derek had thrown. I had seen the signs, the nausea, the fear in the mirror, but I had been too focused on my own marital Cold War to see that my sister was a casualty, not a co-conspirator. I had failed her before I saved her. "I am so sorry," I whispered to Evan. "Do not apologize to me," Evan said, stepping back. Then Lena walked in. Her wedding dress was dragging on the carpet, the hem stained with wine and dirt. She looked like a ruin. She stood at the end of the table, gripping the back of a chair to stay upright. "You told me to be quiet," Lena said to Derek, her voice trembling but audible. "You said if I kept my mouth shut, you would fix it. You said you were saving the family, but you were just saving yourself." The room went deadly quiet. The investors looked from the pregnant bride to the groom to the CEO. The moral rot of the situation was suffocating. Derek stood up, his face twisting into a sneer. He realized the charm offensive was dead, so he switched to the only weapon he had left cruelty. "Oh, stop playing the victim. Lena!" Derek spat out. "You were willing enough. You liked the attention. You liked having someone successful take care of you while your engineer boyfriend was busy looking at bridges. Do not act like you did not want it." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. It was a vile, desperate lie, and everyone knew it. Arthur Henderson looked at Derek with pure disgust. "That is enough," Arthur barked. "It is not enough." Maya's voice came from the speakerphone on the table. I had dialed her in. I just sent the final trace. The money did not just leave the company. It went through the Shell Corporation and paid off the mortgage on a condo in Miami. A condo titled solely to Derek Whitmore. It is a straight line. Gentlemen, embezzlement. Clear as day. I placed my hands flat on the table and leaned in. "Here is the condition," I said, looking at the investors, ignoring Derek completely. "I do not want to destroy the company. I built it. But I am taking my intellectual property with me. The algorithms, the risk models, the code, it all belongs to the LLC I activated yesterday. You can keep the name. You can keep the office. But the brain of the company leaves with me." The investors nodded. They knew a salvage operation when they saw one. Without my code, the company was worthless, but with a deal, they might recover their capital. "You cannot do that," Derek screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "You are nothing. You are just the logistics girl. You are just the bride's sister." The insult hung in the air, vibrating with his arrogance. "I am just the sister," I repeated slowly. "And that is exactly why you should have been more afraid of me." I looked around the room. The investors were signing papers. Evan was guiding Lena out of the room. Derek was standing alone, stripped of his narrative, stripped of his company, and revealed as the small, hollow man he had always been. He had cast me as a supporting character in his life, never realizing that the narrator holds all the power. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking down at the men who had controlled my financial destiny for years. The air in the conference room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I laid my hands flat on the polished wood and gave them the only two options that existed. Option A, I said, my voice devoid of any tremor. We go to court. I released the full forensic audit to the press, including the names of every board member who signed off on the blind oversight. The stock price hits 0 by Monday morning, and you all spend the next 5 years in depositions. I paused to let the threat settle into the expensive fabric of their suits. Option B, I continued. You remove Derek from his position as CEO effective immediately. You enforce full restitution for the embezzled funds. And you sign a licensing agreement for my intellectual property for a 6-month transition period. After that, I take my code and I walk away. Arthur Henderson leaned forward, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. Is this really just about the money for you? Harper, he asked. I looked him dead in the eye. I am doing this for my name. For 10 years. That man has used my name like a dish rag to clean up his messes. Tonight, I am taking it back. The vote took less than 3 minutes. It was unanimous. Derek was out. His phone, sitting on the table, buzzed aggressively against the wood. It was no longer the sound of congratulations. It was the sound of credit card companies freezing assets and lawyers sending summons. The empire he thought he owned had just evicted him. Desperate. Derek spun around in his chair to face Lena, who was sitting near the door with Evan's suit jacket draped over her shoulders. He looked at her like a drowning man looks at a piece of driftwood. Lena, Derek pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. Tell them you are fine. Tell them this is just a family misunderstanding and we can fix it. Lena looked up. Her eyes were swollen, but the fog of fear had lifted. She shook her head slowly. I am not fine, she whispered, her voice rasping. And I am not speaking for you anymore. Evan stood up. He did not look at Derek. He did not look at the investors. He focused entirely on Lena. We are leaving, Evan announced quietly. I am taking her to a doctor. We need to make sure she is safe. And after that, we are going to figure out what truth looks like. He guided her out of the room. He was not abandoning her, but he was setting a boundary that was made of steel. He was choosing care over punishment, but he was also making it clear that the lies were over. I caught Lena in the hallway just before the elevator doors closed. I did not hug her. We were past the point of easy comfort. I said softly. She looked at me, shame written in the lines of her face. You will handle your part, I told her firmly, and I will handle mine. I let a man turn our family into a weapon because I was too afraid to speak up. That is on me. But the silence that ends tonight. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and the metal doors slid shut. 2 security guards arrived a moment later. They did not salute Derek. They took him by the elbows. The man who had stood at the microphone only an hour ago, commanding the room with his arrogance, was now being escorted out like a drunk trespasser. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked like exactly what he was, a fraud. I walked out of the hotel and onto the terrace. The night air in Ridgeport was biting cold, sharp enough to cut glass. My mother appeared beside me. She wrapped her heavy wool shawl around my shoulders and pulled it tight. You know, she said, looking out at the dark water of the river, I always worried you made yourself small to fit in his pocket. She squeezed my arm. Now you are finally standing at your full height. I pulled my phone out one last time. I opened the message thread with Derek. I typed 2 sentences. You were not destroyed by me. You were just caught by the truth. I hit send. Then I hit block. I walked back into the empty ballroom. The staff was clearing the tables. The cake sat uncut in the corner, a monument to a celebration that never happened. The flowers were wilting. But as I stood there, watching the lights reflect off the river outside, I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. For the first time in my adult life, I did not have to ask for permission to breathe. I was Harper Cole. And that was finally enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.